East and across the world. So again, my name is Brian Joyce. I will be moderating all of today's panels, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. It's a beautiful venue. We have many wonderful guests that we've lined up again from around the world, and I think it will be a fantastic afternoon. The first panel will be moderated by a good friend of mine, Mansour Ansari. We do have a video that we would like to show you here about Gaza, and is that video ready to go? Just give it a minute. There we go.
لأن هنا لا يوصف بجد في ناس تنزل وتشوف نفسها مش عارفة المفروضة اللي بتتقال علينا والكلام هما الناس صايمة يعني بينزلوا يشوفوا الصبح فعلا الميدان رهيب. أنا من أجمل رمضان
تحركت وسط الجموع منذ اليوم الأول للانقلاب العسكري في كل المحافظ. أمام منصة وكانت صامتة حينما اعتشت داخل مسجد الفتح عظيمة المكان. نحن ميدان في أرض المحروسة تبدأ وقوتي في المقدمة تشعلنا الحماس في كل حينما يشتد الألم الذين يسقطون وتخفيه لحم حكاية في كل زمان بالأعماق بالكرامة والحرية التي اغتصبت من كاميراتها لتوثق الصور. تعالج المصاب تبكي بجراحه، وحينما يأتي آخر الليل تبكي وتناجي ربها. بالتأكيد لن تنسى من أغسطس زوجها الذي تزوج فهي روحها في سبيل ما تؤمن به وتناظر منه. لا تترك الميدان، فأنتم أهل الحق وأبناء الثورة. هكذا كانت تصرخ في كل مكان. الهمم لكي لا تقتلني يا أبو، فأنا أمك. يا بني، لا تتقدم جرأتك، فأخوك مقتول خلفي ولم. يا بني، ألم يكفيك كل هذا القتل والحرق فينا؟ مشاهد لا توصف بمشاعر. الميدان عن آخره في إيمان الشهداء، وفتحت أبواب الوداع فبدوا بإيمانهم نهاية مؤلمة لا تحجب. هذا اليوم وداع الحبيبة التي جاءت بكاميرتها لتلقيها. وداعا ثم يرحم ضعفتي. وداعا بدم من سيطرة. لا تندهش، إنها الثقة بنصر الله واليقين في قدرته. أيها الشهيد تزوج صاحبة فيكم.
To introduce our first panel. The first panel will run till about 3 p.m. Then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back with our second panel. The first panel is moderated by a friend of mine who, like me, spent a good part of his life, I think, in Boston, Massachusetts. His name is Mansour Ansari, and this is the first panel. Take it away. Thank you, Brian. I want to welcome everybody here again. I don't want to go through a long speech, but we have many speakers today for you. Arranged. In a nutshell, this is the first anniversary of that dark day in Egypt when the people who lost the election and who had connections to the previous regime of Mubarak for 40-some years, who are well placed at the trough of Western and other help from outside to keep the people of Egypt backward. They got together with the military and decided to kill a few thousand people. That we just saw some of the drama on the video. So they're also Egyptian citizens. They also have the right to vote for who they want to vote for. But they lost the election, got together with the military, and decided to shed much blood We have people to my right who are very close to this situation over there, and we'll introduce them one by one. Sister Mahla on my far right is a French-Egyptian spokesman for Egyptians abroad for democracy worldwide, a telecommunications engineer, and holds an MBA in international business. Many of our speakers today were at a previous conference we had in Chattanooga, as Brian was saying, where we were able to bring a lot of academic and important thinkers on this subject together. So we're running a little late. We'll never be done by 3 o'clock, but I hope that we can keep it succinct and leave time for the participation of the fine brothers and sisters and friends, ladies and gentlemen, who came up here today. So we'll ask Mahla Nasser to speak on our subject.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for having me today. It's an honor to be here among such incredible people in a fantastic center.
The past year has been an incredible journey.
For me as a person and as a young woman.
The roller coaster of events and emotions have helped me to grow enormously.
And appreciate the
One
was brought upon and lived in.
The world is going through a very tough time, not only in terms of injustice happening in
various parts of the world,
but also the testing of our morale, moral courage, and value systems,
systems to the core.
and how we as
Citizens
respond to them.
respond to them.
Social media has transformed communication
Education,
in ways unparalleled.
paralleled in recent history.
No longer are mainstream outlets the single provider.
Provider of information.
This has elevated ability to transmit data, realities, and events,
Events in a timely and concise fashion.
video clips,
Video footage,
volumes, in comparison to words.
comparison to words. Just like the video you guys just witnessed.
This new era has helped every single woman and man
Women and men, regardless of age, take root
their own communication network,
social networks and decentralize the
journalistic tool, which was monopolized.
monopolized in the past by mainstream.
So why is this important?
It's important. It's important
Downtrodden, the oppressed, and the means of relief, the means of connection, their global counterparts, without the interference.
interference of prejudice and bias.
The world is waking up to a new paradigm, a world that has more similarities than differences,
Similarities and differences.
a world that relates to each other more than disagrees, primarily because the emotions, the anxieties, and are all pretty much the same anywhere in the world. The only reason why it's becoming more apparent now is because we are starting to talk to each other more. The perception of fighting difference or merely illusions. What does it mean? It means that mainstream journalism will be held to a much higher benchmark of accountability. Policymakers need to address citizens' concerns with real and valid answers. No longer these excuses sellable to So I would like to speak very briefly about my robot. I was in robot for 3 weeks. I wasn't necessarily, I've never been politically affiliated. I wasn't necessarily
supporter of the Brotherhood and did believe that Mercy did make mistakes.
I knew that it was
Completely wrong that a military would take over an elected government. And I
experienced in robot.
experience in Rabat have made me more sympathetic and more supportive of the Brotherhood after having actually lived with them in the square.
My robot experience was the best days of my life.
Days of my life.
Fierce, genuine, courageous people I have ever met. They were the most respectful. Never felt so safe. And that's why I decided
to stay and to
share my voice.
and concern them.
So the robot
experience of the birthday of my life,
the robot massacre was
was the worst experience of my life.
after about Rabah,
for days.
Muhammad Ismail would probably bite my head
I would bite my head off and feed it to the poor people. So I try and keep it as short as possible. But if any questions from me after the conference, I'd be happy to answer them about my experience and about why I stayed,
who I met.
and what I learned from my experience there. So I'll quickly speak of three sisters that I met in Rabah. We spent the entire 3 weeks with them. Some of the most respectful people, they instantly became my family. And exactly 1 year ago, on the 16th of August 2013, they were taken by the security forces from Ramses into they were detained. With their younger brother, who was 17 at the time.
Spent 3 months in prison.
On false charges and no due process. Luckily for me, I was able to see them about a month back. I went to visit them in Ireland for the first time ever since they had been detained. They described their experience in prison to me, and honestly, I can't even describe it to you. It's just they experienced the most excruciating stuff in prison, and then the most
You would probably
not even believe me if I explained to you what they went through. So I respect them so much, and I really hope for the younger brother to be released soon, because he is still in prison for 1 year now.
in Rabah is an experience I will be thankful for.
The rest of my life.
Not only because
Not only because of the people I met,
I learned
from
out of Rabah.
out of them.
What Rabah has done for me as an individual
Individual, that I have exposed the oldest lie in the book, propaganda. How fascism starts.
feeds off of anger, hatred, and sexual.
Hatred and segregation of citizens.
I look at the world now with new glasses.
No glasses,
I do not see color,
see color,
race, or religion.
or religion.
Rather, all I see are people.
Our people, countless separated.
A world that can
A
truly,
world that can truly live, yes,
only if the will to reform is taken to
was taken to heart and addressed.
How can we call ourselves a civilized planet?
Civilized planet, when
Children are mass slaughtered in daylight. The rights of human beings are sold under false propaganda.
propaganda
Principles are not words.
are not words, they are a way of life.
They are important because it sets the playing field to one of societal cohesion and solidarity. It is easy to regress into a jungle. However, it is thoroughly hard for these values.
These values. The payoff
Being upheld is a global
progression of humanity,
in every field, economically,
and socially, etc.
Today, I feel more connected to
Connected to
incredible people I have met through these journeys
these journeys,
at any point of my life.
point of my young life,
Thank you all for allowing me to speak and explain.
and express my emotions and a cause that will always be close to my heart. Thank you again.
Sister Miranda, I really appreciate your presentation. For those of you who don't know, you see how she speaks English. Well, she actually lives in France. So together with Arabic, English, and French, she stays in England. Next she'll add Ebonics. So I'm really happy to have her here. Your mother's here in the room as well. Before we move on to Ahmed Badilla, you notice in the program we have a short videos where there was a 2 or 3 minute piece from CNN, followed by a very sad report from Sister Lemia regarding the murder of her brother. So we can get to that video next. It's a CNN piece.
This is what happened when police first got hold of protesters. Where 5 days after the brutal police crackdown, his friends gathered. It's hard to find. They're mourning here in small numbers, nervously, with a sense of fear that's entirely understandable when you learn how their friend Sharif came to die. Collected Sharif's unrecognizable body for burial.
His torso was and his face. Doctors told me he was suffocated because of that. His face was swollen like a soccer ball to the point his features was totally black.
And the story we heard, his journey to that moment, is sickening. After this arrest, he was among hundreds herded by police into this stadium, the Wia Mosque, where police. Some were battered there, said this lawyer, whose phone rings constantly, with families asking for help to find loved ones missing. And in Sharif's case, one day there was good news, next the worst.
Emotionally, it was difficult. We could not bring ourselves to go and tell them that their son, whom we found alive yesterday, is now today dead. It's like these people are prisoners of war. Usual love.
Sharif's last Facebook. I'm alright. Kairos. Tell my parents not to worry. In the inside. Call my father. He was moved to a central Cairo prison and then one van in the convoy, state media said, took a police officer hostage, retaliated with tear gas and 37 spectators. He was buried Monday, 5 days of hell.
Supposed to was in CNN, now I guess we have them shut over a Skype report of news line from Lemia, who's overseas. Can you get that?
Hello, Lamia. Lamia, can you hear me here? We're here in the Jimmy Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Are you there? Good to see you. Yes, ma'am. We're going to give you a couple of minutes now to speak to the audience live. Can you tell us where you are calling from?
Thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Nadia. My brother who has been prison. I do not know which part is the police forces. Did you guys, did they
Yes, we have just seen the report from CNN. Yes.
An old young man, he worked as an electric engineer in an international company, and he was also a wife. He was never been affiliated to any political party or group. He was opposing some of the president's policies. To help the interest. When he got arrested, a day of service and found him at a police station in a very bad situation. It was very crowded, it was very hot, there's no traffic against him, and then they decided to move him to Abu Dhabi prison for he was planned with 4 other people. A very small man, metal box, set them in the front yard of the prison, 8 folks. No air, no outlet, they didn't even open the door for them. For 8 hours they suffered for a very extreme situation. And after then, they threw a gas bomb to suffocate. The bad situation here is that the thing and totally jammed car. The court was in very bad condition. The officer was in charge of the event trial for them or officer, but they all said now they are unfit. And the reason is who threw the gas bomb in the military section of like that the van was surrounded with policemen and they still staying inside and social. This annual memory, we pray very hard that the criminals, dead master and murder, get the same way to be killed in the same way. All the Ministry of Interior, like the head of all the officers, we just pray every day to trap, slave, and suffocate to death. My mother and parents and just they can't believe it. And remembering in this day, whole year. They keep only with drops. So we will not be even trying for any one of them to be killed the same way as him.
I understand the emotionalism and the position you've taken, and of course your story is unique for you, Sister Lamia, and we also know that this horror and atrocity has been committed thousands of times by those forces over there. We were privileged to see some of the photos of your brother before he passed away. We understand the contribution that hopefully will be recognized in months and years to come when freedom and democracy come back to Egypt. And we want to thank you very much for being available for this presentation. God bless you, and we thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
We cannot imagine what you're going through, and we just sympathize and send our condolences. We have a tremendous amount of committed people, Egyptians living abroad, that are here in this building right now at the Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And again, we thank you, Sister, for your participation, and we'll be in touch in the future. Okay, now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the next presenter, Ahmed Boudir. He's the gentleman here. He called me and said, "What color tie are you wearing?" I said, "I'm wearing a blue one." So he said he's going to wear a red one to be distinguished, because I'm very close to this man. He used to be the director of CAIR, C-A-I-R, the Council on American Islamic Relations, in the Florida branch. He was very active there in Florida, but now he's based in Washington, D.C., and he's the president of the United Voices for America, an Egyptian American social entrepreneur, and also a TV, radio commentator and host. He, for your information, like Sister Nahla on the far right, he was also there at the Rabaa massacre, and I must introduce him on that very dark note because of what happened there. He will tell you now. Ladies and gentlemen, Ahmed Boudir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for hosting this great event in this awesome venue, first time I've been to the Carter Center. And it's very fitting that we're here because President Jimmy Carter, while in office and since then, had been advocating for democracy and political reform, and especially focused on the Middle East, in Egypt, and in Palestine. And constant calls for more political inclusion and have also political reform.
I want to talk to you today as the screen
says about my brother Amir. Usually when I talk to folks, I'm talking from a human rights perspective or from an advocate perspective, and for over a decade I've been advocating for the human rights of other people, and not usually being a victim. I haven't been human rights abuses myself, thankfully. Many other people have within this country and around the world. So this was the first time where something so close happened to me. And even though you have the training and it had to be with advocating for human rights of other people, but nothing really prepares you employees to somebody from your own family. There's no training for that, there's no on-the-job training for that. So there was traumatizing, obviously.
About my brother and
you, we grew up in this country, but at some point my parents decided they want to go back to Egypt. My father was, had 6 other sisters, and his older brother passed away. He felt an obligation to go back to Egypt to help prepare his other sisters, as well as his mother. And we decided to also go back to Egypt and stay there. We chose, everybody and I chose to stay here. So we went back to Egypt, went to college there, eventually got a job as an accountant with KPMG, multinational corporation, and we all started his own business. He was never politically involved in anything, not politically inclined. There was no reason to be politically involved because there was no political space for the regime that existed. But at some point we decided to become more religious. Joe was a religious person, but when you started thinking his religion, he was visibly weird. And this is actually a picture of him when he was younger. And with some friends, he used to, even though we lived in Egypt, he used to come in the summers and visit us in Florida. But later on, when we got married, we became more religious and grew a beard. And in Egypt at the time, everyone had a beard, and you frequented the mosque more than once a week. You were a target. I'm not talking about like hard daily prayer. It was just, if you appeared to have a religious affiliation, you went to the mosque on a regular basis, you were watched. And we went to the mosque more than once a week. The Fajr and we get harassed by security forces because they actually had a religious security forces that monitors religious individuals. And they had files on them, and every now and then they would get dragged in and questioned. So we felt that this was a violation, there's nothing we can do about it. So he responded to the call, and there was a call on January 25th to go to Tahrir Square to protest against police brutality, and that's what the January 25th revolution started out as. It was actually coinciding with the National Police Day in Egypt. They organized people to come out to protest police brutality.
and he would go out there to revolution as most
others didn't. They eventually evolved into that. But we wanted this type of harassment to end because he felt it himself that he was a person. So we joined that call, and that was probably the first political activity that we participated in. And once he was there, he was hooked. He stayed there for the entire time until Mubarak got up. I got so jealous and inspired by him that I myself flew to Egypt, but only got there on the night that Mubarak fell. So I cannot say that I spent all that time there, but he was there even during the Battle of the Camel, and he was on the front line near the museum. I don't know if you remember those images on CNN and around the world of these guys on camels swarming through the protesters and eating them. People that was injured on that day. But he continued to come back because he loved the spirit that was there. And in fact, I remember when I was there and the people started moving back to the square, we felt like it was too soon to leave. We wanted to remain. And we felt like the regime wasn't going to fall because Mubarak was the head of the regime, but it was far bigger. And now, in hindsight, I agree with him, but it wasn't enough for Mubarak to fall.
he felt that, go back, there were several other
protests that I even joined working in that was protesting. After Mubarak was removed, the military took over.
there was a lot of atrocities.
There's a lot of atrocities that were happening, and there was still revolutionaries were not accomplished, like the end to martial law, the end to
all those
things continue to be there, even though Mubarak wasn't there. So some people continued to go to the Tahrir Square and say these things, and I joined him at least on a few occasions.
he was frustrated.
Because he felt that the revolution of January 25th never completed. And that in order to avoid it, the military hijacked it. They struck a deal with Mubarak that he would step down so they could remain in power.
Because they felt that
if they did not remove Mubarak, they would do something that it would be the end of the land themselves.
him and some of his friends and other people
He
position is a little wrong. I traveled to Egypt. I
was actually, there last summer during August. We were there already planning for months and we took a family vacation. And also that one of my other brothers, we were 6 boys. So one of my youngest brothers was getting married. And the wedding.
The week before that, I
had hesitations about going off what was happening. And my family assured me that, it's still safe to go. And that, we still alive and was normally and not be intimidated by what was happening.
So we did go
to Egypt to celebrate the wedding, and I was there when all that happened. And I was able to witness the aftermath, and this is basically the story that I'm sharing with you. And this is actually, you can tell this was taken in the early 90s. It was not goofy when you looked at it. And I actually had a beaver on my bed. I remember the beavers.
The mirror is right there.
The mirror is right there in the purple shirts, and that's why I didn't put a cinema. And that's another cousin that was there, and good times.
And you're like a cook.
And then, like I told you later on, we had a spiritual transformation. It's not a bad thing. People become religious. We should not be afraid of religion. I think we become religious in this country and around the world.
Fortunately,
the same Islamophobia that exists here also exists in other places because it carries through the media. And he was the kindest person.
hurting anyone else.
He was visibly, really shared, some characteristics with some other people that you might see on television in Afghanistan, or he had a turban in his head, but he was a very gentle person. Everybody that met him said he was a stand-up guy, he helped them. Never yelled, never raised his voice, and, committed to his family. And this is him going to Alma. In fact, we actually got a chance to go to Alma, which is a mini pilgrimage in the beginning of July. And I remember when July 4th happened, and we were called the military, the military gave President Morsi 2 days to take action. And for the military forces to work out the differences, or they going to take action.
July 3rd,
they overthrew Morsi. And we were so distraught. He called me from the Mecca. He was there doing the military pilgrimage. He was in Egypt. He was so frustrated. And I was in the United States. And he was upset. And he said, how can America, not the United States, support this military coup? And why aren't they calling it a coup? They're for democracy. And he was because I worked in government affairs and lobbying because he was trying to get my help or my advice on what to do. And he was actually urging me, so you got to be more local in America to tell them that this is a military coup. And he was in Mecca, and he said, that once he goes down back to Egypt, immediately that he was going to join the political protest or the sitting in the White House. Now, Amir was never a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. He wasn't affiliated. If you look at him physically, he looks more like a Salafi type person, or this Orthodox religious brotherhood and a Brotherhood members that always have the clean shave or the goatee or the
no beard at all.
No beard at all. That's kind of weird. But so
he wasn't a member.
He wasn't a member of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Critical of them.
He thought that they compromised on some things. He was critical of them, but he felt that they struck a deal with the military after the January 25th.
Allowed him to run for office.
Elections, and he felt they shouldn't have run for elections. It was too soon. You shouldn't have any elections until you get the foundation right. And he felt that they, betrayed the other revolutionary.
Or is it
they made strategic mistakes. Now, we never blamed them. Criminals never thought that they deserved anything that happened. And whenever there's an opportunity to defend them, to defend democracy, we would do so. And that's what happened. He decided to go to Damascus, not because he's a pro-Morsi supporter. In fact, Morsi was not his first choice for the presidential candidates. It was his second, it was his choice in the second round because he had a choice between Shafiq, who was the last prime minister. The prime minister under Mubarak.
The government was overthrown.
When it
time, the choice was,
again, between the Lawrence regime
and
and
the choice for him
the choice for him was obvious.
Yeah, everyone knows, because as you know,
Because as you know, Morsi won it by only 52 and some percent. But because by that time there had been so much media campaigns against Islamics, or the Brotherhood and others, that a lot of people feared what was to come. And there was also, of course, many other situations where the revolutionary groups had their own differences and they could not unify themselves behind one or two candidates. But again, Morsi was not his first choice.
when he came,
Down to the most important chose Morsi. When it came down between a military coup or no military coup, we of course decided to support the protesters.
not because he's a
Because he's a pro-Morsi supporter, but because he's pro-democracy.
I voted for
I voted 4 or 5 times in these elections. What happened to our vote? We're not going to allow what we fear the most, what we resent the most, is military rule, what we say, that we subjected to the press for rights. He has his freedom that he can go out and he's not being harassed, and they have disbanded the unit that harassed religious individuals. So he felt a sense of freedom. He got a piece of that. He didn't want to go back, and that's why I moved to Al Square to do that.
this is the last picture.
Last picture that I took with a road before he died. It wasn't the mosque where my brother was doing the wedding service. We actually,
Hours.
hours before the Lama massacre, we were having a wedding not very far from Lama in D.C. And so we were happy. I guess my brother had been to his wife being married, and then I guess. And this is the next image. You know, my mom, this is me identifying my brother, killed in Lama. I had spent the night before, it was early that morning.
And the last time someone
saw him
about 12:30,
he came up to his mother-in-law's apartment, she had an apartment in Lama, within the neighborhood, so he came up and they were even there for 6 hours.
fire.
Helping other people. He wasn't armed, he didn't carry weapons, he probably doesn't know how to use any weapon.
We went up.
He went upstairs, he talked to his wife and said, upload these pictures to Facebook. It shows some of what the military is doing to us. And at that point, the wife saw that he was injured, his wife was injured, didn't accept that. And she begged him to stay. She said, don't kill everybody, stay. Don't go back down, we fight, and I have an obligation to go back. Otherwise, I would betray them. And the country women and children in the streets. About 1 to 2 hours later, he was shot by a sniper. When I saw him, he had a bullet right in his neck, single shot. And when I went to his his body, there was some shot, expected. These are the means, and we found him in a mosque for allegedly demanding to be clean, a makeshift morgue. Where I counted, these are the IDs of all the people that were there, or some of them, hundreds of bodies. I took these pictures. I counted at least 350 bodies, and most of them, about 90% of them are single bullet wounds or shots to the head, to the neck, to the upper body. This wasn't a shot that was discriminated. This was targeted killing. I saw bodies that were torched. So this is, imagine, there's more refrigeration. Everybody had to just hunt for themselves and put a block of ice on the body so that it doesn't decompose in the heat. People are just carrying the different bodies. One thing that I'll just end with that's significant is when you went there, you want to retrieve the body and take them out. Then when something happens, a forensic team comes in and do an investigation. It wasn't even like that. It felt like a war zone. And when we want to take the body of the near so we can do the burial, they gave us a death certificate that says that a near died of natural causes. Dispensing to everyone. My parents refused to accept it. They said they killed him, we're not going to accept this. Of course, they were intimidated, they were supported with things like they're going to cut him up, they're going to do an autopsy, you're not even going to recognize your son, you may not even get the body for weeks or months. You may not even get the body. So we're going to take our chances. We're not going to accept this. However, many other people will accept the death certificates, and that's why I believe how the government, the military regime, was able to keep the death lower by taking these death certificates.
In order to bury a
body, you can't just have your dead body and bury it in the ground. How do they know that you didn't kill this person? just leave and have some sort of official document that allow them to bury the body.
Very easy to have a
They don't have a death certificate, so they're holding the bodies hostage until they agree to their demands. So the only way they protest, and you have to get some lawyers involved in this crisis. And they said that the process was you have to go to miles away to the police station to file a police report. Now imagine this is the same police you suspect killed your brother, and now you're telling them, please give me a case number so that, my brother was killed and all that. By the month that God were able to get that case number, we have to go to a place like Zimham, which is the medical examiner's office, to get the medical examiner to come to Rabat to investigate the body and sign off on the documents in fact he was killed. And they had orders not to give the certificates.
lawyers,
A lot of pressure. They one or two examiners, allegedly demanded into some of the other images that took the images where they actually examined the man's body, and by sunset we were able to get the death certificate. So, this one does say that he was shot by a person, and, getting into the graveyard is also a challenge because you're under pressure. There's no one that can help the driver, the only money to be able to put the body on the truck. This was a scene outside. We saw all the people that were missing people, and they were really fortunate ones. We were able to find our brother. We other people could not find their loved ones or could not get the body out. Finally, we were able to bury him, and we could see using flashlights at the end of the night. So, that's the story of my brother.
I want to thank you, Brother
Thank you, Brother Ahmed, for this gorgeous and very touching presentation. I cannot imagine that we did all these things under pressure.
in mourning.
Imagine, ladies and gentlemen,
In mourning
for losing your sibling when the government puts you through all that and those kind of rules. What I'm getting from your presentation, brother, is that the military regime said that we died from natural causes.
insult.
Insult. Here you are, you see the bullet wound is there, the sniper wound, and they want you to sign a paper just to get the body. I want you all to understand this. And whoever's listening to the recording is going to hear about this conference after it happens. Imagine this Egyptian
Lead. Our country, America, billions
of dollars to bring for the military
machinery,
not to protect the country from outside, but to
maim and mutilate their own.
eliminate their own people.
Sitting here in the Carter
So the Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia,
understand what's going on over there.
the woman where they've been driving,
I've been in the Middle East.
I've been in 700 times myself. I know how things go. You want to get a government document, takes you half a day just to figure out which land it's going to be. And all kind of, bureaucracy. They're sitting here in that desk like they're some kind of military tank that they're in control. And you give them the paper.
And they go step.
And you have a stack here, and you put it over the stack to give you the impression that if you don't give me $100, we'll get to this next month. Okay?
Big problem.
Big problem, right, of corruption.
Supporting this regime.
In this regime, when you tell this man that your brother died,
And if you sign this,
if you say he's your brother, give him your back.
if you want to have any rights,
Any rights, it's going to take longer and longer.
while they're in mourning there,
to get rid of this. Anyway, we've been talking about this for a long time, but we have the final speaker of this session. We know we're running out of time, and organizers are going to be very angry with me. We have a rather lengthy speech coming up now from the keynote speaker, Haitham Mahmoud Khalil, to my right. The reason it's going to take a little longer is because it has to be simultaneously translated. To give him a proper introduction, Haitham Mahmoud Khalil is the manager of the Dahaya, which is the Victims and Human Rights Center in Alexandria, in is a very important city in the trading world over there. He's a very important thinker and speaker, and they can speak at the podium level, and they will speak in Arabic, and then they'll have a translator upstairs. Thank you very much.
In the name of Allah, the title Humanity for All. I think the feeling of humanity and freedom and happiness is to feel all these feelings. It is bad and it's miserable to live in a bubble away from others. Because humanity is a responsibility, is not just merely a feeling. We've been really hurt because of the event that happens in 9/11. As we believe security and the feeling of is a right for human being. And we have all to cooperate together. And shame on the president and the rulers to be a part of that. I believe that the human rights have to be away from politics. And also believe that politics is an assistant for human beings. There are historical events. The international world were actually very good. And there were other events when silence was the hero of the scene. As we know about Egypt, Palestine, Gaza, and Iraq. I work as one of the humanitarian activists in Egypt. I'd like to share with you. It is a full crime that what happened in Egypt. There was people that they were dream of democracy just like
as close as possible to your political and democratic experience.
However, got down the there were a lot of interference from west and from everywhere that actually hindered the way to democracy. Or more accurately, it was a kind of retelling against these facts, and unfortunately, these. Let me talk to you about the slaughter and the massacre of the century. This is the respective Human Rights Watch report I'm using. 100-page report is a testimony for history.
سادة
القتلة والمجرمين في مصر لم يكتفوا بالقتل والحرق والاعتقال.
Not only it sufficed them to kidnap, to crack down, and to kill, but
أخرجوا ألسنتهم ضحايا بالتصوير
فوق جثث أبنائهم. They have been welcoming of the dead bodies in front of their families. نحدث جميع أشكال انتهاك حقوق الآن في مصر.
all the kind of human rights violation happened in Egypt. We achieved records in this field, but unfortunately in the violation of human rights.
سمحتم إصابة وإضراب لأطفال معتقلين.
Have you been ever sit-in for kidnapped people and detained children? This is happening in Egypt. 13 and 14 kids are detained just because he carries a ruler that has the sign of Rabia or a balloon that carries the same sign, or just simply because he's taking part in protesting against the
المجرمين الساديين لم يكتفوا باعتقال الأطفال.
Those killers, sadistic people, they didn't have enough of killing the children.
تعذيبهم في تحرش واغتصاب بعضهم.
They've been harassed and they've been tortured in jails and organization places for kids to detain in Egypt. What a shame.
كذلك طال البنت أو الفتاة أو المرأة المصرية.
It was not only boys, but it's also girls.
طال المئات واغتصاب بعضهم.
Hundreds of girls were detained as well, and some of them were raped. This is not haphazardly said, but as a humanitarian activist, I have accurate figures. And we can guide you, I can guide you for some videos that we authenticated on the YouTube. Harassment, collective harassment, and raping in the police cars. Verdicts that also were against girls. 25 years were sentenced to Russia and her sister Hind. International reports been issued before. John Kerry signed down a report from International American about the human rights of Egypt. It was 70 pages.
ووثق وتحدث عن بالجملة في مصر.
Police report confirmed a collective killing to people.
مصادر معلوماتهم لقاءات في مصر.
And John Kerry himself, in the heading of the report, confirmed this fact from their sources of embassies in the world.
رغم ذلك التحرك بصورة مناسبة لوقت هذه.
However, no actual step was taken to prevent this disaster.
أعود إلى نقطة مهمة.
Let me get back to a very important point. And there is a dirty game.
يقوم بها
People are taking part in it. They're the people that
بتصدير الأمر إلى العالم الكل.
trying to send out the image.
ما يحدث في مصر لمنع قيام دولة إسلامية.
This is what is going in Egypt in order to prevent establishing of an Islamic state.
أن هناك ممارسات تمت في عهد الرئيس
The era of Dr. Muhammad Morsi,
الزواج المبكر ب9 سنوات.
claiming that girls were forced to get married in an early age,
تشويه أعضائهم التناسلية
and they've been deformed through the time of trying to having an operation when they are very little.
بتعدد الزوجات. دول العالم.
It was a customized deforming of the image of the era of Muhammad Morsi in a very sequence that were sent to the international media.
للأسف جملة نتروجها في بعض المؤسسات هنا.
Unfortunately, a bunch of lies that were propagated in American media.
ثم تبع ذلك أحداث هجمة أمنية عنف وإرهاب.
And after that, there was crackdown from the military apparatus in Egypt
حتى يتم تبرير هذه المجازر التي حدثت.
in order to justify the slaughters and massacres that happened.
مثل عمليات قنبلة الدخان حتى يتم التشويه على ما يحدث في مصر.
It's just like a smoke bomb in order to cover and conceal what is going on the ground.
لو حدث أي انتهاك للمرأة المصرية فهو حدث على أيدي هؤلاء الانقلابيين.
Any violation that happened to an Egyptian woman, it was because of those people.
مصر دولة مدنية ولا يوجد فيها دولة إسلامية.
Masr is a civil state and there is no Islamic.
وحتى أكون معكم موضوعيا
In order to be objective with you,
أعرض عليكم جزء يسير التقرير الرائع لهيومن رايتس واتش.
let me tell you, share with you part of the Human Rights Watch report.
أعتقد أن هذا التقرير كشف أمور كثيرة.
This is the report which conceal a lot of facts.
وأريد أن يفكر الكثير منكم أن ما حدث في مصر
I want you to think about it, that what happened in Egypt
هو دولة العسكر التي تتهم اقتصاد مصر ومقدرات مصر.
military state that's eating up the economy and resources of
دولة
Egypt.
عميقة فاسدة
The deep state, the deep corrupted state in Egypt
تريد أن تحافظ على مكاسبها
wants to actually keep their gains.
وليس المهم الشعب كيف يحيا أو كيف يحيا.
They are completely careless how people should live and should survive.
جاء تقرير هيومن رايتس واتش مذهلا.
That was fascinating Human Rights Watch report.
يحدثنا عن الصدمة التي كسرت القلوب الضمائر الحية في العالم.
It talks about the awe that broke the heart of the people.
إنه تقرير رائع لأنه يريد إزالة العار الذي يجلل العالم على الصمت على ما حدث في مصر من مجازر.
A fascinating report because it is actually removing away the shame that completely crown our heads because of our silence.
التقرير يوثق ويقول أن ما حدث في رابعة هو أكبر مجزرة في التاريخ الحديث.
Reports completely that what happened in Rabaa was a big massacre in the modern history.
هذه المدة الزمنية التي هي 12 ساعة فقط.
In a very short period of about 12 hours.
إن الأمر تجاوز مذبحة سينا نامين في 3 و4 يونيو 1989 في الصين.
And this is actually series what happened in Tiananmen in China massacre.
وأن ما سقط وسقطه هيومن رايتس من عدد هو 817 قتيل.
107
عندما تتحدث هيومن رايتس ووتش عن توثيق هي توثيق محكم من عدة مصادر
It's highly accurate from so many resources.
ثم تحدثنا عن 246 ايضا ولكن توثيق غير مكتمل ربما يكون عدة مصادر
246 also, but the number of resources was not enough.
تم قتلهم في عدة ساعات.
About 1,000 beings that were killed in 2 hours.
كل جريمتهم أنهم كانوا يريدون أن يعيشوا أحرار.
All what their crime was about is just asking for their freedom.
أسقطت كل الدعاوى الكاذبة أن هذا الاعتصام كان مسلحا.
Human Rights Watch actually sealed this fact. This supported sit-in in Russia.
الأمر كان مزعجا كما قالت أن ربما العدد تجاوز 2000.
There was that there might be 2,000 people killed, but we had no big number.
قررت هيومن رايتس ووتش قمرا صناعيا يوم 2 أغسطس.
Human Rights Watch the 2nd of August 2015.
ووضح من الصور لقطها من القمر الصناعي
Evidence from the pictures that were taken from Rabat Square.
تجاوز 95,000 معتصم.
There were about 85.
طبقا لتصريحات وزير الداخلية.
According to the statements of Minister of Interior Ibrahim,
قالها في 19 الخسائر المتوقعة لفض الاعتصام ربما تتجاوز 10%.
and losses that are expected or estimated to disperse this sit-in is almost 10% of the people.
أشرح لكم المشهد بصورة أخرى.
Let me explain it in a different way.
أريد أن أقول لكم أن مسرح الجريمة علمه تماما.
As I'd like to tell you that the theater of this killing in Rabat Square was completely demolished.
وتم حرقه بالكامل.
It was completely burned.
تم حرق المستشفى الميداني.
The shift clinic was burned as well.
بل تم حرق مسجد ودور عبادة.
And there was a mosque that was also burned, Masjid Rabat.
وحرق كتب مثل القرآن.
And they burned heaven's book like Quran.
وإزاحة الجثث بالجرافات.
And they remove the crops with bulldozers.
ونقل صحراء السويس.
And they move it to Suez Sahara.
وتم كان بالماء وإعادة قبل أن تعاين النيابة.
Everything get back to normal after you do everything in the square before the Attorney General had a chance to check the scenery of the crime.
هنا يظهر السؤال المهم.
Now we have a question.
وغيرها
Was actually asked by Human Rights Watch and other organizations.
لماذا حتى هذه اللحظة لم يقدم أحد للمحاكمة على هذه النظام؟
Why till now nobody was coming in front of the court to be judged for what he did from the crimes he did in Rabat?
سهلة ربما يجيب عليها أصغر طفل في القاعة.
Everybody can answer this. Even the littlest kid in this room can answer this question.
أن المفروض الذي يصدر التعليمات بالتحقيق هو القاتل.
Can you believe that? Because the one who should give the order for this investigation is himself the killer.
فيليس روس المدير التنفيذي لهيومن رايتس ووتش
executive manager of Human Rights Watch Council,
قال عبارة مؤلمة للغاية.
he said a very painful statement.
قال إنه الأمر مروع ومحطم للقلوب.
It's heartbreaking
تقضوا على آمال كثير من المصريين
to actually vanish all the hopes for a lot of Egyptian
عقد ثورة 2011
after 11
الشعب كان يحلم فقط بالديمقراطية.
for people that only dreamed about democracy. I'm going to ask you,
لمصلحة من يتم تكفير شعب بمبدأ ومفهوم وطريقة الديمقراطية؟
to whose benefit can we say in Egypt disbelieve in the principle of democracy?
لا أريد أن أطيل عليكم ولكن في دقائق قليلة للغاية.
I don't want to make it so long. If you got a few minutes.
هيومن رايتس ووتش لم تكتفي فقط بتوثيق مذبحة رابعة.
Human Rights Watch not only did documented the massacre of Rabia,
ولكنها وثقت عدة مذابح أخرى.
but also they documented other massacres.
مذبحة النهضة التي سبقت رابعة بدقائق.
Among them, slaughter and the massacre of Nahda, which was preceding Rabia in a few minutes.
87 إنسان.
87 people were killed in Nahda Square.
رغم أنهم احتموا بمبنى كلية القاهرة.
Even though they were trying to by the Faculty of Engineering University.
هذا ينسف كلام الانقلاب وقتل أن هناك كان ممرا آمنا.
And this is actually concealing the big lie of a secured corridor.
وتقرير يكمل
And the Human Rights Watch report actually carrying on the rest of the slaughteries and massacres.
أن يعني أشكرهم على العلم العبقري الذي عناه.
However, I would like to thank for the very interesting genius title.
حسب الخطة.
حسب الخطة, it is according to the predetermined plan. That was the
كشف أن كل كانت مدبرة وحسب.
It was highly planned and
الحرس الجمهوري 61 إنسان.
The Republican police slaughtery and massacre also was documented by Human Rights Watch. 41 people were killed there.
في أوائل الأول من شهر يوليو 2013
of August 2013.
ومذبحة المنصة 65
The platform Manassa slaughtery was also documented by Watch.
أود أن أقول لكم أننا اليوم تمر يوم 16 أغسطس تمر ذكرى مذبحة
The first anniversary, 16th of August, 120 people.
وثقت أيضا أفراد من ضباط قسم
People of district. A big, enormous number of Egyptians.
عندما خرجوا يتظاهرون احتجاجا على مذبحة الرابعة التي سبقتها بعدة ساعات.
When they made it to street in order to protest against the Rabaa massacre that happened a few hours before.
المذابح ستتوالى في مصر.
Massacres are
أمن العقوبة أساء الأدب.
And if you believe that you're not going to be punished,
والتقرير ذكر أسماء بعينها هي المسؤولة عن هذه المجازر.
there were certain names that were coming forward that are responsible and they have blood on their hands.
وإلى سخرية الأخبار.
And what a sarcastic way to look at it.
أن رئيس الجمهورية الحالي في مصر هو السفاح الأكبر.
And the president of Egypt now is the biggest killer.
والكلام ما زال لهيومن رايتس ووتش وليس لي.
And this is actually not my words. I'm quoting from Human Rights Watch report.
ذكرت أن عبد الفتاح السيسي بصفته نائب رئيس وزراء آنذاك.
Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who was the prime minister at that time.
كونه وزير الدفاع ومسؤول الملف.
Besides being the defense and the one responsible for file.
وزير الداخلية ورئيس وحدة الخاصة مدحت
Special Forces Manager and Commander مدحت المنشاوي.
ورئيس جهاز المخابرات محمد فريد تهامي.
And investigation
من كبار مساعدي وزير الداخلية.
Our assistant. And 3 leaders of the army.
هؤلاء هم القتلة الرئيسيين الذين استفادوا كل هذه المجازر.
The main killer.
في نهاية كلمتي أريد أن أطلب منكم شيئا.
In conclusion, I would
منكم الاستجابة لنداء وأرواح الضحايا.
I'd like you to respond to the call from
أن
these
تعملوا
souls
معنا جاهدين.
to work with us.
استعادة الإنسانية والضمير في العالم.
To regain the humanity.
لا نريد أن هذا التقرير يموت مثل غيره من التقارير.
We don't want likewise.
نريد محاكمة عادلة لهؤلاء المجرمين.
Justice for those criminals.
بعيدا عن سفالات السياسة.
Away from the dirtiness of politics.
عندما تموت الإنسانية والضمير في العالم.
Because when humanity is dying in this world,
سود الكراهية والحقد.
hatred is going to raise up.
وهذا خطر علينا جميعا.
And it is a danger for all of us.
مرة أخرى.
Again.
SOS Egypt. شكرا لكم.
Bring this session to a close. I know we
have some questions. Do you have some questions written in index cards that I can go through quickly? We're running kind of overtime. And let's have another round of applause for our panelists, please. Ask the panelists if you can respond to these questions without another lecture, but to give a quick, concise answer, because we have to move on to the next session. For those of you who might not know, we're being simultaneously broadcast on a number of global stations, including Al Jazeera and others. So for Nahla, did you experience or have knowledge of rape or harassment during your Rabba experience?
Simple answer. I haven't felt so respectful. I noticed that I would love a much longer answer.
But I'm sorry, I can't. This was directed isn't it more accurate? I'm sorry, that would be weird. Isn't it more accurate to say it was not sorry?
The enormous U.S. Egypt is not simply
to name and regulate your people, but to continue to be a frontline enforcer
for U.S. interests
in all of the Middle East and to facilitate with Israel the assault in Gaza. It's a very comprehensive question. I agree with the sentiments behind the question.
Cliche nowadays, and
for the last 40 years of my life, to say that how easy it was, all the Arabs are. It's like when you hop in this country, it's so Africa and the Middle East, it's got no scholarship, it's got the heritage of the Arab and African and Islamic world there.
a million people.
as the rest of the Arabs will go. So therefore, when you have an axis of the UK, US, and Israel, and the Saudis and Syria, those pom-poms and mini-skirts and cheerleading around, if that particular axis is supposed to run the affairs of the world, Egypt has to be a player and a supporter because of the
lukewarm treaty
that had Israel over the years. I don't know going there, it's been 12, 15 years, long time, I think you get the drift. What specifically should we demand of the U.S. government to this insanity? That's a good one. Do we take this one?
The pressure on the government to stop paying our military $1.5 billion a year.
One family, everyone.
The earth is one country, and our humanity is one family, and I can't decipher this in writing, but the sentiment is the fact that we are all
mortified
by this massacre that happened.
news every day.
Sound by water. News every day.
So many people.
And so many people have forgotten about it, but like I said, it's a very important event, and we have to promote the position that opposes dictatorship in all of its forms, military dictatorship, even an Islamic dictatorship. We shouldn't be supporting any type of dictatorship that
Rules by force.
That's the last one. How are you going to make use of Human Rights Watch report? Are you going to see CC for killing your brother? It's kind of sarcastic, Stephen. Can you hear that a little bit? Well, our family is dedicated to make sure that the killers are know about the justice. And we can't do it by ourselves. We need to help other people. And it starts with raising awareness. We need people to know about the atrocities that happened there. It's the biggest massacre in modern history. And the media, of course, both Egyptian media as well as the international media, has played a role in covering up the massacre. We think there's somehow a battle that happened between these pro-Morsi supporters and the pro-military supporters. There was basically two political camps going at it. That's not how it happened. These were people that were defending democracy, and the other side were opposing democracy. One side were the victims, the other side were the killers. And that's what we need to be treated as such. We want to make sure that these killers are identified with Human Rights Watch, don't get the privilege to travel the world, are not legitimized by meeting with other world leaders. We will shame other world leaders that meet with these killers, just as they refused to meet with the president of North Korea. This person, Sisi in Egypt, is equal to the president of North Korea. He kills people, his own people. Imagine, General Sisi has killed more people than ISIS has killed people. We have a lot of news about ISIS. And the plight of, the sensational news about, of course, I'm against ISIS. I condemn them for whatever they're doing. But when you look at dictators like Bashar al-Assad, when you look at dictators like General Sisi, when you look at other dictators that are killing far more people, the United States stays silent. But then when a fringe group that are numbered in the hundreds that are going out and doing this violence in Iraq and Syria, then all of a sudden you have to dedicate all these warplanes and do humanitarian exercises. Well, what about the people that we already have our allies with? Our own ally, Egypt, is supposed to be an American ally. And we won't even tell them to stop. We won't even tell them don't kill more people. It's the same thing when, Israel is also an American ally. But the one who tell Israel stop killing people in Gaza. So people in the world, because of social media, thankfully, more and more people are waking up to the truth about what these governments are doing. We should continue to say that in our name. And these are not going to change until we come on to Washington, D.C., not just marches and protests, but we contact our lawmakers. One thing that all of you can do here is take the information, go back to call your lawmakers. Right now they're on recess in the district. They're not in Washington, D.C. Go find out who they are,
كونغرس
call their office,
اختارهم برأيي.
go meet with them, you can speak to them about what happened in Rabbi Square. Many of them don't know the realities. They get their information from CNN or, God forbid, Fox News.
هم يأخذون
So that's what we have to share the
يرونهم وجهة نظر.
demands. Ask them, why are you siding with the Kurds? Why are you supporting people that are killing their own people? I fight for democracy. And the alternative to democracy is going to be like Iraq. More than military and dictators, but that will feed into more radicalization. People don't have, when they go to vote 4 or 5 times, and they believe in democracy, and somebody comes and uses a gun to destroy
لن تؤدي
democracy,
إلا إلى الوعي.
they're going to go back and vote.
لم يترك ذلك.
It's because they can't express themselves.
لأن الناس لا يستطيعون
Getting killed by.
أنفسهم.
Thank God, so far the protesters in Egypt haven't turned to violence. But how long will they continue to stay that way? And is it, you almost start thinking that the military in Egypt wants to provoke it to the point where they become violent. So then they can push them and say, look, we are fighting real terrorists. And they keep calling them terrorists even though they didn't use terrorism yet. But if they say it enough, then somehow eventually they'll turn to it. And this government has a history in Egypt under Mubarak of using terrorism action or terrorism acts. They do it themselves and then blame it on the Muslim Brotherhood or other Islamist groups. The big example was right before the revolution, there was a big bombing in the church in Alexandria. The ministry
الناس كنيسة الإسكندرية.
people blamed it that it was Islamists. So those same people are capable of bombing their own police stations, even sometimes killing their own soldiers to justify the continued crackdown, and they spread mayhem. One last comment
الشرطة
to
تفعل منهم مدبر
about whether to support.
تغيير العنف.
The dilemma in Egypt is not whether you're for Morsi or for the Brotherhood or for something else. You're either with democracy or you're against democracy. You're either for military rule or you are for freedom and self-determination. And that's what we need to do. One thing that there seems to be a polarization within the Egyptian
هناك
is rising.
حادث النصر.
One thing we can all agree on, people that were killed in Rabaa and anywhere else, that's unacceptable.
لا يمكن.
People should be held accountable, and we may not agree on who should lead Egypt, but we should definitely agree on that military rule in Egypt is a bad thing. So let's work together to make sure that it ends. Thank you very much. And we look forward to the next session. Take a 5-minute break. All right? Thank you very much.
这边。
This is the feet. So literally, this is what we're going to do. It's only going into one feet, right? Yeah. And they'll decide when they want a crowd shot. Either way it goes, it don't matter. The only way it can change is whose laptop is there.
Yes.
Tap into bring that laptop downstairs.
They're using it.
But they're getting the video.
I think they won. Yeah, but that's.
Start the session in about 2 minutes, so she'll be glad something to read.
What's waiting? But only is plug it in.
In about a minute or two, so if everybody could have a seat, that would be great.
Call me today.
I'm gonna wait for him now. I'll tell him.
Call me.
Ladies and gentlemen, second panel, if it's a seat, that would be great. Thank you.
So we want to do, we'll have Melissa first. We'll have Melissa first, then I'll shoot second. Okay, I'll let them know. We'll do
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin the second panel now. Welcome everybody.
To welcome everybody back, and again, thank you for being here today. This is obviously, as you look at the images and you've seen the videos and now heard from some of our featured guests, clearly today we are here to talk about some very important issues, and we're here to spread the message that we do want to spread, and we're very appreciative that everybody has come out here today, and we're especially appreciative of the Carter Center for hosting us today. The second panel, we would like to expand the conversation here beyond just Egypt, because as I mentioned in my opening statements, a lot of people here today who have come from all across the world to speak. Many of them would like to speak on some of the atrocities that you have seen today that occurred in Egypt last year, but really we would like to expand this conversation into a general discussion about freedom and democracy and human rights across the Middle East, across the globe. That's really why I'm here today, because unlike a lot of the panelists that you saw in the first panel, I have actually never been to Egypt myself, and I have never been to Lebanon, and I have never witnessed the atrocities that some of these people have witnessed themselves. But what I do feel very strongly about, and there were some comments made to this effect towards the end of the first panel, democracy is democracy. And the reason I'm here today is because I'm a very staunch supporter in that idea. In that if you support democracy, well then you support democracy. And whether or not you approve of the political party who has won, whether or not you approve of the president who is currently in power, this to the people who are here today is irrelevant. If you support democracy, then you support the process. The president who happens to be in power at that particular time, under a democratic system, we should have a process in place to do that. And the images and the videos that you saw earlier, that is not that process. Killing, imprisonment, and that is not the democratic process. So, if we support democracy, then we should. So, feature Melissa Turner. Melissa of Gandhi's B magazine, and she's come down here from Chattanooga, Tennessee, with me today. We also have Dr. Mohammed Al-Masri, and Dr. Al-Masri is a visiting scholar at the University of Denver's Center for the Middle East, and that is Dr. Mohammed right there. Norman Finkelstein, and Norman is a political scientist, an activist, a professor, and an author from right here in the United States. And Norman, I think you came from today, Washington?
New York.
He's here from New York, so please.
And last but not
least, right to my right here is
Palestinian
American, and she currently has family
living in Gaza.
And of course, we've all seen the video. We know what's going on in Gaza right now, and obviously she has family and friends back there who are
Siege.
and under bombardment as we speak, and this has been going on for the past several weeks. So please welcome Ms. Al-Najjar. And I think we would like to start off this panel as well with a short video. Get the video going in just a minute here, and then we'll get to our speakers. Do we have that video?
Tens of thousands of Egyptians took to the streets in Cairo and provinces throughout Egypt to oppose this. We had
أطلق جنود النار على شك 800 شخص تم يد المجال. تشير إلى قدوم قوات مختلفة وبسرعة في دقائق من طائرات صائنة رجال السلطة رصاص الحي منذ زعمت الحكومة أن زعموا أن هناك تلك خطة مدبرة لإطلاق النار من هو متواجد ليس له علاقة خلص.
في دم على الأرض كل الجسم كان بيطلع في وانا طالعه السلم من الدم قدرت اطلع على عين واحده تاني والمشهد هو ذاته والناس مصابين على الدم كانت وانا طالعه على المذبح اللي هو ريحه الدم كانت دم بني ادمين
وقد دخلت الرابعة السادسة ممكن لننطلق على أوكيها خطأ ضابطة بطريقتنا تعتبر جرائم ضد الإنسانية لأنها ممنهجة إطلاق نار ممنهج على المدنيين بغرض قتلهم لكن فالمسؤولين ممكن لكنها فعلت العكس مع تظاهرين بدلا من
To introduce our first speaker here, and it is Melissa Turner, and she's the executive editor of Gandhi's New Magazine.
Good afternoon.
I bring greetings to you from Gandhi's magazine editor-in-chief and secretary,
فيك magazine من مجلة
Yes, we have a video from Gandhi magazine. If we could bring that up. Perhaps while we're waiting for that video, if you want to continue.
Throughout the Egyptian Revolution, I've witnessed the power
of the people using social media to tell the stories of what is really happening on the ground.
We watched as young people led the revolution with their cell
phones and their Facebook pages.
And now we are watching as social media are telling us what is happening in Gaza.
And what is happening even here in Ferguson, Missouri.
This is the democratic process. Freedom of speech. Freedom.
Of the press.
Americans
have been complacent in our regard for democracy for too long.
Should not take the shooting of a young
black man in Ferguson, Missouri. It should not take the tear gas and rubber bullets of a militarized police department.
It should not take the arrest of reporters exercising their constitutional rights to tell
the people the story.
It should not take these things happening in
America to wake us up to what is happening on a mass scale.
In Gaza and across the Middle East and around the world. As Gandhi's magazine editor-in-chief, Mr. President, message. People, let us take our technology and our social media and tell the stories that are not corporate media and government. Let us advocate for freedom and democracy for all people around the world. The world is watching us. What are we going to show them? He asked. We must be the change we wish to see.
ذكرنا مرة أخرى نحن التغيير الذي نريد أن نخلقه.
Learn to use technology if you're not a young person, and tell the story. Talk to the media. Talk to each other. Be friends on Facebook. Increase your Twitter. Do not stop. Make your voice so loud. Make your message so clear that America and the rest of the world cannot be silent anymore. And they cannot back down. And they must stand up and support this because this is democracy. And that's what we want. Washington, D.C. right now for the march. We started
مسيرة الحرية لغزة في واشنطن في العاصمة الأمريكية واشنطن. أن وسائل الإعلام الأمريكية الرسمية مثل CNN أو البريطانية مثل BBC لا يخبرون الناس الحقيقة حقيقة ما يجب. تحيا فلسطين يا غزة.
Joe Stork, the Deputy Director from Human Rights Watch, and that's via Skype. So, Mr. Stork, welcome. There you are. Can you clear him up there? Mr. Stork, can you hear me? I can hear you. Welcome. Appreciate you joining us today. Feel free to make any comments you would like to add.
I'm not sure the Skype connection. You know what? Why don't we?
We'll take that down for now and we'll move on to our next speaker because I think maybe we need to work on this.
Let's introduce the next.
Let's introduce the next speaker here. His name is Dr. Mohammed Al-Nasri.
Visiting scholar.
University of Denver, the Center for Middle East Studies, professor of communications at the University of North Alabama. And after we hear his remarks, perhaps we can get back to Joe Stewart at Human Rights Watch. But Dr. Mohammed, please continue.
Can you hear me? I'm going to get right into this because I have a very limited amount of time. I'm a media researcher, so my focus is on what the Egyptian media have been up to over the past year and before that. What happened in Egypt was not just a military coup, but as I've been writing for some time, and as many others have been writing, it is and was a campaign of elimination. It was a campaign to eradicate the Muslim Brotherhood, the group that had won 5 consecutive free and fair elections, and also all competition, not just the Muslim Brotherhood, but all competition. So on July 3rd, 2013, it wasn't just the case that the elected president was removed from office, but in fact, the elected president was arrested. His entire presidential team was arrested. Arrest warrants were prepared, hundreds of arrest warrants were prepared for political leaders. All of the oppositional television networks, every single oppositional television network was shut down. And that was just on July 3rd. In the days and weeks and months that followed, a series of massacres were carried out. We're talking today about several other massacres. We have estimates range from 2,000 to 4,000 people killed. In total, more than 40,000 people have been arrested. More than 20,000 people are still in jail. Political Islam has been banned. Islamist-run charities have been banned. The Muslim Brotherhood has been labeled a terrorist organization. The definition of terrorism has been expanded so broadly that it now includes as terrorism acts that, quote, harm national unity or, quote, hinder the work of educational institutions. So if you hold a protest on a college campus, that is an act of terrorism. You will go to jail for quite a time. So this is a campaign of elimination. And again, not to eliminate only the Muslim Brotherhood, but to eliminate all competition. Just as a kind of an anecdote, I was in Egypt on January 14th of this year when the referendum was taking place, the referendum on the Constitution. I drove through intentionally 5 different cities on that day, and I saw literally thousands of advertisements on billboards and flyers and posters that said, vote yes to the Constitution. Does anybody have a guess as to how many vote no signs I saw? You're a smart crowd. I didn't see any. And there's good reason, because the people that tried to put vote no signs up were arrested. So this is and was a campaign of elimination. There's been mass repression in the aftermath of the coup. We're seeing much of that today, some of the video evidence and other evidence. I'm interested in how do you justify these acts of mass repression for an entire population? It wasn't enough to describe the Muslim Brotherhood and others affiliated with the government, the former government, or their sympathizers or supporters. It wasn't enough to describe them as incompetent. That just wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have been enough to say they're incompetent and they're exclusionary or they have a narrow agenda. Frankly, and I think Egyptians know this, many politicians are incompetent and have narrow agendas. So that wouldn't necessarily justify a military coup. And it certainly wouldn't justify this campaign of elimination, these mass slaughters that we've seen. So what was needed was something more. And here we have a series of discursive constructions of the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters as being un-Egyptian, foreign, treasonous and criminal. How do we justify this? So the average Egyptian, will you tell him or you tell her that the Muslim Brotherhood is a foreign group? They're not of us. They're not from us. And they're also criminals, terrorists. And this is what's happened. I mean, that's just a very broad overview. I have a lot of evidence that I could unpack. I'll only be able to scratch the surface with you today. But before I talk about some of these discourses in a little bit more detail, let me just say something about Egyptian journalism. There's a pretty extensive body of literature now on Egyptian journalism. I happen to do my PhD dissertation on the Egyptian press system. And very briefly, because I think there's a tendency to want to compare. You know, inherently we do that as humans. So we think of, if we think of Egyptian print journalism, we think of, you know, American print, you know, newspapers, the New York Times or whatever. If we think of Egyptian broadcast journalism, we might think of CNN, right? Well, it's very different in Egypt. Egyptian journalism scores very low on several different measures of professionalism. So education of journalists is very poor. Training is either poor or non-existent in many cases. Many journalists graduate from college and they don't know how to write a news story or carry out an interview, quite literally. These are things that I learned when I was doing my dissertation, when I was doing my field research. There are problems with the journalistic ideology. Here, the ideology, for all of its problems, and there are numerous problems with the American press system, we could talk about it another day, but here, for all of the problems, the dominant ideology is detachment, neutrality. That's what journalists strive for, most of the time, in this country. Now, they oftentimes fall very short, but at least that's what they're kind of aiming for. In Egypt, we have an entirely different situation. So Professor Abdullah Schleifer, when he was doing some of his research, he found that the journalists there in Egypt, many of them told him that they were activists, first and foremost. A journalist in the United States would say, I'm a watchdog. When I was doing research in 2013, this is in May 2013, my research team and I, we carried out interviews with journalists, and they explained to us how they intentionally biased news reports against Muhammad Morsi and against the Muslim Brotherhood. And they saw no problem with this. National duty. If you look at some of the recent discourses, Khairi Ramadan, Ibrahim Isa, and other prominent broadcasters, these are Anderson Cooper-like figures. I figure since we're close to CNN, of course we can make an Anderson Cooper reference. These are Anderson Cooper-like figures in Egypt. They have come out in recent months and said, you need to give us the credit for the glorious revolution of July 3rd. They think it's, you know, they consider it a revolution, not a military coup. They're saying, give us the credit because, as Khairi Ramadan said, we assassinated the character of Muhammad. As Ibrahim Isa said, we are the ones who knocked the Muslim Brotherhood off their heads by spreading all of these rumors about them. And I'll talk about some of those in a minute. You know, here it's very typical. Even on Fox News, you will find a point and a counterpoint. Now, Fox News, don't get me started. I know that there are numerous problems, but even on Fox News, to be fair, there is at least some attempt to hear another point of view. Now, frequently they'll attack that other point, but at least it's there on some occasions. In Egypt, we don't get this in most cases. It's very common to have a talk show, and I was doing a lot of research in 2012 and 2013. You'll have 4 guests on a talk show, a news talk show, and they're all saying the same thing. There's no debate at all. 4 guests. I was watching on TV once a show, they had 9 consecutive guests on over a 75-minute span, all saying the same thing. So there's really, and this is very common, this is very typical. So this is just a little bit of background. I think it's important to kind of contextualize this a little. Now let me look a little bit at some of what was being said and what is still being said in Egypt, to give you a sense. Well, how are Egyptians, at least some Egyptians, we have to be honest, I mean, Egypt's very split according to the empirical data that we have. Millions of people are opposed to the coup, but millions of people support it and support Sisi. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. So how do all these people support what is clearly a very repressive campaign and agenda? I mean, people are being killed in the streets, quite literally. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013, and especially after the military coup, was described as a foreign organization. As Ghani, a famous analyst and writer, said, the Muslim Brotherhood's governance in Egypt constitutes a foreign occupation of the country. So they're not Egyptians. We have lots of stories talking about the Muslim Brotherhood's close relationship to Israel. These are stories that you can read in the Egyptian mainstream newspapers about the Muslim Brotherhood's close relationship to Barack Obama in the United States. And I have to point this out. In this era of hyper-nationalism in Egypt, the United States and Israel have been set up as the enemies of Egypt. And that Sisi is the one who is protecting Egypt from the United States and from Israel. And so to say that the Muslim Brotherhood are in bed with Israel and the United States is a major indictment. One of the mainstream daily newspapers in Egypt on the left ran a headline which said, Barack Obama, the American president, is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were uncovering some breaking
the Tea Party was saying the same thing.
Sure. Fair enough. We had stories about the Muslim Brotherhood's close relationship with Hezbollah, the Lebanese group, Iran, and importantly, since now this invasion of Gaza is still ongoing, to Hamas. This was something that was repeated ad nauseum in Egyptian newspapers. And it wasn't just that the Muslim Brotherhood had close relationships with these countries, but it was, as the Akhir al-Nahar, one of the Akhir al-Nahar hosts said, these people should be tried for high treason. They had unlawful agreements with these countries, attempts to destabilize and ultimately destroy Egypt. So just to give you some tangible examples, Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood were accused of combining to instigate a mass prison break. Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood were accused of conspiring to kill the revolutionaries in 2011, those anti-Mubarak protesters. It was the Muslim Brotherhood, not the Mubarak regime. It was the Muslim Brotherhood who they were actually protesting. Apparently they killed themselves. They, along with Hamas, killed the protesters in Tahrir Square. And in another version of this narrative, they were joined by the Knights of Malta, middle-aged group. This is an actual headline now. I'm translating this. It says, then this is from a left newspaper. This is a mainstream daily. The Knights of Malta and Hamas are behind the killings of the January 25th revolution. It's not in the Onion. It's not on the opinion page. This is a news headline. Okay. So it's not surprising, all of the anti-American sentiment, all of the anti-Palestinian sentiment that we see in Egypt right now, there's a ton of anti-Palestinian sentiment. The media, mainstream media in Egypt are largely siding with Israel in the current episode. We've had CBC network, mainstream network, talking about Palestinian terrorism and talking about Israel's precision rockets. Right? This is what we're finding. This is a major kind of a change. And even in Mubarak's era, we wouldn't find that kind of blatant support for a policy that is really directly responsible for killing large numbers of Palestinians, Gazans. So the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters, their sympathizers, the people that are protesting the coup, the people that are against the new order, the political order that was created on July 3rd, these people are not just incompetent. It's not just a matter of them not knowing what they're doing politically. No, these people are foreign. They're enemies of the state. We had news stories about the Muslim Brotherhood's desire to sell the pyramids. This is a serious news story. The Muslim Brotherhood was going to sell Mohammed Morsi. Some of the news stories suggested that a deal was already in place to sell the pyramids. There was another story. Again, these are ongoing stories. These are not, I'm not just sort of hand-picking singular reports and making a big show. These are ongoing stories. The Muslim Brotherhood was going to sell the Suez Canal to Qatar. And in going back to Hamas in Palestine, the Brotherhood was going to, in an act of charity for their brothers in Palestine, they were going to give them the Sinai Peninsula. Not sell it, but actually just give them the Sinai Peninsula. So these are serious news stories. So the Brotherhood is a foreign group. On July 3rd, Lamisa Hadidi, who's a very famous broadcaster, she said, Egypt is coming back to us. She said, no one can rape the people of Egypt, neither the French, nor the English, nor the Israelis, nor the Muslim Brotherhood. So you see the association there. Broadcaster Khalid Ramadan, the famous broadcaster, he said the Muslim Brotherhood does not understand the meaning of nation. He said they are foreign agents and unpatriotic. These are direct quotes. One of a prominent guest on Mahmoud Saad program, who's a high-ranking judge, said that Egypt was kidnapped by the Brotherhood. Notice the language that's being used. Egypt was being occupied. So you can start to see these. When you wonder to yourself, how are average Egyptians, some of them at least, supporting what's going on? This is, I think, in my analysis, in my opinion, this is one important reason why. Because the Brotherhood was framed as a foreign group. That same judge in the same interview went on to praise God, and he said, quote, Egypt has been returned to the Egyptian people. Another prominent guest on the same program said, Egypt will not become modern as long as this cancerous tumor, referring to the Brotherhood, exists inside this nation. There was also popular culture. There was a song that was released by a famous singer named Ali al-Habgar, and he said, the chorus of the song said, you are a nation and we are a separate nation. He's addressing the Muslim Brotherhood. He says, you have a Lord and we have a separate Lord. So they're not part of the nation, the Brotherhood. And this is why also, interestingly, fascinatingly, you get this discourse surrounding those protests, those anti-Morsi protests on June 30th of 2013. What were the protesters called? When I went back to the news stories, they weren't called protesters, they were called Ashab, the nation. So it was the nation that rose up. And then you get all the absurd figures that you all heard. There were 33 million people in the streets protesting. Some people said 40 million. Some media outlets and some political figures said there were 30 million people protesting just in Cairo. So just for those that don't know, Cairo's population is 18 million. So that would mean every man, woman, and child and baby protesting, and then bringing in 12 million more people to protest. I mean, completely absurd protest figures. But this is what we were getting around the time of the military coup. Another important discourse, which I mentioned briefly, is that the Brotherhood is a criminal group, a terrorist organization. This really takes off. Almost overnight. It's actually fascinating to watch the news discourse change. Because on July 2nd, 2013, the day before the coup, the Brotherhood and Morsi were incompetent. But on July 3rd, they became terrorists. And Hadidi said, and I'm quoting her now, she says, we now know who opened the prisons. We now know who invaded the prisons. We now know who the snipers were, who was shooting at the protesters. End quote. So she's blaming the Brotherhood for acts of violence without any evidence. Numerous complaints on talk shows and in the newspapers about how the Muslim Brotherhood was prepared to turn Egypt into Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. This was a major concern, right? So the Brotherhood was transformed discursively into a terrorist organization. And there were some bombings after the July 3rd coup at police stations. Now what's interesting about these bombings is that the Brotherhood denounced them. There was no evidence and is no evidence linking the Brotherhood to these bombings. And other groups, and this is the most interesting thing to me, other groups actually took responsibility. Groups that are antagonistic to the Brotherhood, like Ajnad Misr and Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. They said, hey, we did it. And the government's response, the media, their response was, no, it's the Muslim Brotherhood. You did it. And so there's the narrative, and everything has to be kind of force-fed. You have to fit reality into that narrative. The Brotherhood and their sympathizers and supporters have been described as Khawarij, interestingly. People that have exited the religion. They're not even true Muslims. They're heretics. Right? And tragically, there's anti-Jewish sentiment in Egyptian society. Tragically, this is just one of the realities. But so when you wanna really denounce somebody, what do? Unfortunately, you say that they're a Jew. And this is what the media have done in Egypt. They've said the Muslim Brotherhood are Jews, or at least they're sympathetic to the Jews. And so, and the newspaper ran a piece about how the Muslim Brotherhood was carrying out the agenda of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. There was an article in the Ruz al-Yusuf newspaper that said Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the 1920s, was a Moroccan Jew who was planted by the Freemasons in order to found the movement. That's a direct quote from that newspaper. Interestingly, just recently, you heard about the mass death sentences. 1,100 people condemned to death in these mass trials in Egypt. The judge, when he was asked about the mass trials and justifying them, he said some very interesting things. He said these people were demons who were following the devil. And he also said that they were following Jewish scripture, the Talmud. This is an Egyptian, high-ranking Egyptian judge. And this is, of course, picked up now. You have to imagine this being picked up in all of the media. The last thing I want to say, and I know I'm running out of time, since we're talking about Rabah, I want to look at what were the media outlets in Egypt saying about Rabah? Because I actually went back and looked at this, and it's actually, frankly, it was difficult to watch. It was some of the most difficult television I've ever had to watch. I watched several hours of Rabah coverage. And in a nutshell, the shows that I watched, the prominent news shows that I was watching, were thanking the police for their bravery, describing the police as the victims, and saying that they played a heroic role in rescuing the country from terrorists. On TV, one of the networks on TV was actually showing footage of the dispersal and playing music from the movie Rocky. The soundtrack Rocky in the background. One of my students messaged me, an American student, a graduate student from the AUC, and he said it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. He told me about it immediately. There were all kinds of rumors being reported as facts. So, for instance, one of the rumors was that the Muslim Brotherhood burned the stage. We know from the human rights reports, and just even common sense, it was the security forces, the police, that went and started burning. They were burning Rabah and the stage, probably to destroy evidence. But matter-of-factly, the news outlets said it was the Muslim Brotherhood who was burning. On their way out of Rabah, they decided to burn the stage. And the reason why, and this is also important, this goes into another rumor, one of the big rumors, and this story took on a life of its own, that the Brotherhood was storing dead bodies under the stage at Rabah. And specifically, there were 80 dead bodies stored. Don't ask me how they know that there were 80, but there were 80 dead bodies. This is a story that went on for 3 weeks. So it was 100 degrees. 100 degrees. And the Brotherhood was storing dead bodies. It got to the point where David Kirkpatrick of the New York Times had to write an entire article debunking this myth. And it shouldn't, really have to come to that, but that's where it was. Am I out of time? Can I say one or two more things? Okay. There's so much. There's a lot of really interesting examples. I wanted to try to get some of these out. But they also ran the press conferences of Hazm al-Biblawi, the Prime Minister. They ran the press conference of Mohammed Ibrahim, the Minister of Interior, and they were saying that we exercised, quote, maximum self-restraint, and in another quote, the highest levels of self-control. And the media people were just basically parroting it. They were repeating it. They were thanking the police. We had callers, experts, calling in, thanking the police, claiming that they did some heroic act. Hassan Shaheen was interviewed, a leader for the Tamarrud political movement. He said, "I've never seen a dispersal like this before. They were nice, paving the way for people to leave. using microphones. Another Tamarrud representative said the protests were broken up with a, quote, high level of professionalism on the part of the police. They said there were a small number of casualties. We're hearing about 800 casualties. How many casualties did Lamis al-Hadidi report? 36. And she said there were 32 police officers killed, and there were only 8 killed. So this is what we were getting, some of what we were getting in Egypt's media on the day of and the day after the Rabaa massacre. Thank you.
We have so many questions here, and we'll get to them in just a minute, but we do have to move on. Very quickly, I do have to ask this. How much was the Muslim Brotherhood asking for the period? I'd love to know.
Probably
Is it just going rates?
Probably too low of a price.
Do we have Joe Stork?
We have Joe Stork now.
Joe, can you hear us? Joe Stork from Human Rights Watch. Joe, we saw your video and we saw your coverage of the massacre in Rabaa. So let's go back to that briefly. Tell us, well, we heard what you saw, but just to be clear here, did you witness any acts of terrorism? Because of course what you hear from the Egyptian military is that they were putting down an uprising and that they had to defend Egypt and defend the military and defend the country. To us it would appear that most of the casualties were innocent protesters, civilians. Did you witness any acts of Yes.
لا لم نشهد أي أحداث إرهابية ولم نوثق ذلك.
There was a lot going on, so it's quite possible things happened that we didn't see. But look, we spent a year looking into this. We interviewed more than 200 people.
لقد قضينا حوالي سنة ونحن نبحث في هذا الموضوع، وتم مقابلة حوالي 200 شخص لإعداد التقرير. منهم صحفيون ومنهم مشاركون في الميدان. كان هناك عنف من بعض التنجيم المتظاهرين. بالتأكيد كان هناك أيضا أسلحة. ولكن بعد المجزرة وزير الداخلية نفسه هو نفسه الذي قال أنه وجد أو قواته وجدت 15 بندقية. ولكن 817 نفسا قد أزهقت. وفقط 8 رجال شرطة في رابعة.
Let's talk about the media coverage, because obviously we just heard from Dr. Most of the media coverage has been a joke, really. I don't know what kind of insight you've had into that, but has your organization been able to, is there any credible media reports? Or did you really have to get in there yourself and interview the
نحن لا نعتمد على تقارير الإعلام، نحن نوثق تقاريرنا بأنفسنا.
International reporting and even some Egyptian reporting. But I think what you're getting at is the fact that there is a kind of and this started after July 3rd, so it had been going on for about 6 weeks before the Rabaa crashes. you had a kind of hysteria taking over in the country.
كان التجمع في رابعة حوالي 3 أسابيع لحد إلى 3 يوليو.
And the media was very much part of that, taking part in it, feeding it, encouraging it.
وقد كانت أجهزة الإعلام المصرية
Joe, we certainly appreciate your time, and before you go, if you can give your...
أسهمت في الوصول إلى المجزرة كان لها دور في ذلك. شكرا يا جوز.
HRW.org. And if you go on that site today, or I think anytime over the weekend, the very first thing you see is
Human Rights Watch حتى يتمكن الناس من قراءة التقرير.
And so I encourage you to take a look at that and also put your look at that.
Okay, Joe, thank you. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And again, that was Joe Stork, the Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch. Expand the conversation to Egypt and into other regions of the Middle East. And the next speaker is Hajar, and she's a Palestinian American. Has family friends who are back in Gaza right now, dealing with TV for 5 to 6 weeks. Please welcome her.
والدي والدتي كان
in a refugee camp. My family lives as refugees in Gaza since 1948. With everything that's been going on, Gaza is the biggest open prison in the whole world.
سجن في العالم.
My friends and I always have a joke. When you ask them all going on, how did this all start? Well, I won't go back today to 1948, but I'll go back to January 2006. January 2006, the year when we had open elections in both Gaza and Gaza.
عام 2006 كانت هناك انتخابات وقد نالت حماس النصيب الأكثر في الانتخابات وفازت بها. بقيت المقاعد لحماس وكانت الانتخابات تجري تحت أعين بعض المنظمات الدولية والمنظمة التي يشرف عليها جيمي كارتر نفسه وقد أفادت بأنها انتخابات نزيهة وعلق على ما أسلف به الدكتور محمد المصري ليست فقط الأسود ضد الأبيض أو الخير ضد الشر وفتح مقابل حماس كأنك أحدهما شرير والآخر يحمل كل الخير. فتح في هذه الحالة هي التي تحمل عندما فازت حماس في انتخابات 2006 كانت هناك معضلة بينها وبين فتح. بين غزة والضفة. سافر بعدها عباس إلى مصر يناقش هذه النتائج التي حدثت في الانتخابات. التعامل مع القيمين على الأمر في قطاع غزة، ولم تحصل السلطة الفلسطينية أيضا على كل ما تم الوعد به. حماس لا تقر بإسرائيل كمحتل، ولكنها لا تتمنى كما سبق الذكر بعدم وجود دولة إسرائيل. والشرط في ذلك أن الحدود إلى اتفاقيات 1967 فيما يتعلق بالحدود بين دولة إسرائيل ودولة فلسطين. في نقطة ما يتعلق بمعبر رفح، كان غلق المعبر هو الأمر السائد منذ حدوث الانقلاب، وقد تم حصار غزة منذ هذا الحين، فلم تكن تحصل على الحاجات الأساسية. وفي 2013 عندما تم الانقلاب على الرئيس المنتخب محمد مرسي وحكومته، كانت هناك بعض الأشهر في ظل حكومة مرسي عندما تم السماح بدخول كل ما يتعلق بالمساعدات الإنسانية إلى قطاع غزة، ولكنه توقف بعد ذلك. ولكن بفور حدوث الانقلاب عاد الأمر كما كان عليه سلفا، حيث تم غلق الحدود في رفح بين مصر وغزة، نقص حاد في الأدوية والأغذية والحاجات الأساسية لمجتمع غزة. الطلاب وكذلك المرضى علقوا على حدود مصر وفلسطين في معبر رفح ولم يسمح لهم بالدخول. وفي التوقيت الذي نتحدث فيه الآن ينتظر 4 أطفال رخصة السماح لهم بالمرور. هناك الآلاف من الدولارات سوف إلى غزة. المعبر قريب من ذلك.
taking a database and collecting data on the people who are suffering.
بعض الناس يحاولون مساعدة قطاع غزة، وبعض الناس يستثمرون أوقاتهم دون مقابل في محاولة جمع المعطيات الأساسية الذين يعانون من جراء الحرب على غزة. هناك في الأماكن المختلفة من جباريا وخان يونس وأماكن أخرى مئتين وثلاثة وسبعون ألفا يتخذون ملجأ أو مغارات يحاولون الهروب من نيران المعركة. ويبدو أن عندما لا يستطيع كان مليون ونصف المليون نسمة في غزة، بنية تحتية مهدمة وصعوبة الحصول على المياه النظيفة، وهناك حاجة ملحة للحاجات الإنسانية الأساسية. ويبدو أن الأمر يتعلق بقبول حماس كونها مفاوضا من عدمه بالرغم من قبول دولة إسرائيل. هناك طريقة ممنهجة أو مشكلة ممنهجة في محاولة الهجوم على أي محاولة تحاول أن توقف شلال الدم. أو في أي دولة قد تم الانتخاب بشكل ديمقراطي فيه. والمعيار يكون في إذا كان ذلك في صالح الغرب أم ليس في صالحه. فيمكنهم أن يساندوا حكومات قمعية بمجرد الحصول على بعض المصالح. لأننا نجد في المنطقة كذلك والحكومات القمعية التي لم تستجب لمطالب الشعوب.
Thank you, Gana. We've been submitting a lot of questions here, and I thank all the members of the audience for doing that. And we will get to all of the questions, as many as we can. So thank you again, and continue to submit them. I think they thumbs up if you do have a question. I would like to get to our next speaker, Dr. Norman Finkelstein. He is a political scientist and activist, professor and author from the United States. He's joining us here from New York City. Please welcome Dr. Finkelstein.
من نيويورك وهو أستاذ أكاديمي جامعي.
Thank you for having me.
شكرا لاستضافتكم إياي.
I'll be on what's happening in Gaza.
خلال الشهر الفائت. أو تواصلا مع ما يحدث في مصر من عام مضى. ما حدث في غزة وما يحدث في غزة هو جزء لا يتجزأ من ذبح وإبادة لم تبدأ في الحقيقة بما حدث بين 9
You of course know
يتذكروا ما حدث في هذه الأيام والذين قضوا مجرد ما يحدث حولنا سيناء أسباب نسيتم على غزة يوسف الناس في غزة يقتلون هذا له علاقة بما أو بآخر صلى محمد رسول الله وقف غزة مع مال على الهواء
in about a week's time, President Bush designated by Obama as the person who was going to resolve that conflict. Causing a big difference in terms of lives and destruction.
هذه الحرب كادت أن تحدث لمرسي بعد الانقلاب مبارك ثلاثة حروب الحرب الثانية هي أكثر عددا أن تهاجم غزة
so much misinformation and disinformation about what happened in the last 10 days. It's a lot of I'm going to try to, as best as I can, correct the record right as I understand it. It's important to try to understand what happened, to be clear about what is the departure. We read most of the news coverage and what happened, at least the news coverage in the West.
everybody says the point of departure that
ضرب
these teenagers were abducted from Hood, and that wasn't the point of departure for what happened. The real point of departure is this place of the meeting to it.
تم قتلهم
The election in 2006 and early 2014, the unity government, and this unity government included Hamas,
حية أو موحدة
which is what was a terrorist organization.
بين فتح وحماس وكان كانت السيد نتنياهو يهللون باسم حماس منظمة أشار بأن المفاوضات بين فيما يتعلق ولا نتنياهو ولا ولكن خاصة واشنطن جعل الغطاء القانوني والإنساني عن منظمة حماس لما والجميع يعلم ما حدث وبدأوا في إبادة بعض البيوت وقتل الناس صراحهم عليهم ضرب حماس رد الفعل عنيفا وهذا تواصل به مع الإسرائيليين عندما قال لهم لا تشكوا في ثانية فيما يتعلق بحماس. في بداية الأمر لم تكن حماس هي البادئة ولكن خرجت الأمور عن السيطرة بدأت غزة تمطر الأراضي المحتلة بالصواريخ وما زالت الآلة العالمية والإسرائيلية محاولة أن يزيلوا الغطاء الإنساني أو الصفة الإنسانية لحماس بما يفعلونه وهكذا يدعون. ولديهم هذا التعبير مخزن البنك الأهداف ما تم محاولة الهجوم عليه سلفا، وقد تطورت الأحداث لكي حربا ضروس غير إنسانية على القطاع. والآن نتنياهو لديه مشكلة كبيرة، هو لن يستطيع أن يوقف هذه الصواريخ التي تأتي من غزة، لأنه لا يستطيع أن يضربهم في وحاول الحرب البرية إذا على غزة. المجتمع الإسرائيلي لا يحب أن هناك قتلى بين الإسرائيلي، ومحاولة منه بائسة لتقليل حجم الخسائر البشرية. أن سوف تقوم بتفجير مسافة ميلا كاملا قبل تقدم القوات البرية. والآن نتنياهو لديه مشكلة والآن هو في مشكلة، لا يستطيع التقهقر ولا يستطيع التقدم، أسلفت ذكره. وسوف نتحدث عن توني بلير. هو الذي كان يكيل المدح إلى السيد مبارك قبل خلعه من حكمه، وهذا هو دوره في الحياة، إنما يتعاقد مع الموت ومع مصاص الدماء كما حدث مع مبارك والسيسي. وماذا فعل؟ وسوف نسمح بعد هذا الوقف، سنسمح بدخول المساعدات الإنسانية إلى غزة عندما يستتب الأمن في المنطقة. والحل الوحيد لكي يستتب الأمن في المنطقة هو إما أن ينزع سلاح حماس، أن تهزم، أو تسلم أنفسها. وفي محاولة ماكرة منه أراد أن يصبغها بالصبغة المصرية. أنا أشك في أن السيسي قد قرأ حرفا من هذه الاتفاقية أو المحاولة البائسة لتوني بلير.
He's brain dead on arrival. So, yeah. So they initiated to Sisi.
ووضع هذه المبادرة بين يدي السيسي. وعلي أن أقول أن هذا كان حركة ماهرة منه.
The whole idea was first put Hamas in the
الفكرة الأساسية هو أن توضع حماس تحت هذا الضغط. أما الثانية فهي تتعلق بالحكومة المصرية وموقفها.
He wanted to elevate.
وهو أراد أن يرفع مكانة السيسي بهذا الأمر. وفجأة يبدو هذا الرجل القاتل لكي يكون ملاك الرحمة لمن ينزع فتيل الأزمة بالحرب على غزة.
So now he wants to reinvent.
يريد إعادة تخليق السيسي بشكل مختلف. المبادرة المصرية.
And the other thing, the other gift.
الآخر بما يتعلق بسقوط غزية، وبعض الناس بين الأحداث، ولكن مستر نتنياهو في 1989 في ذكرى الانتفاضة.
And you may recall Kenneth Rourke of Human Rights Watch comparing the Leviathan Square massacre with the Tiananmen massacre. So how is all this related? It actually is related.
ولكن دعونا نتحدث عن كيف تترابط هذه الخطوط مع بعضها مع بعض. 1989 عندما أعطى السيد نتنياهو خطابا في إحدى الجامعات الأمريكية، غضون الهجوم على ميدان ميانمار في الصين، كانت الكاميرات توجه لكي تعزل العالم عما يحدث في الأراضي المحتلة. وهناك علاقة لما يحدث في هذا الميدان في الصين، كما أنه له علاقة بما يحدث في الطائرة الماليزية، كارثة الطائرة الماليزية، لمحاولة حجب الرؤية أو تشتيت الانتباه عما يحدث. ومع ذلك أيضا يحاول تصوير حماس بشكل إرهابي دائما. ومدة مدة الأيام وقف إطلاق النار رفضتها حماس ولها الحق في ذلك. النقطتين التي أود أن أنهي بهما حديثي أن ترى المساجد والمدارس والمستشفيات تقصف. وأنا أنقل عن رئيس الصليب الأحمر بأنه قال أنه لم يرى في حياته مثل هذه الإبادة الجماعية التي من شأنها أن تهز ضمير العالم. من الذي سمح وما الذي سمح بذلك كي يحدث؟ الإجابة لكن دعوني أقول لكم أن الذي تسبب في هذا الحرب هو السيد باراك أوباما. هذه حقيقة، محض حقيقة. أنا لا أقول ذلك بكوني في أي منظمة ضد رئيس أوباما.
And when he was asked, or his spokesperson was asked about what was happening in Gaza, each day he repeated that same refrain, quote, Israel has the right to defend itself.
وعندما تم سؤال الناطق باسم البيت الأبيض كانت الإجابة الموحدة كل ليلة في لقاء مع الصحفيين أن إسرائيل لها الحق في الدفاع عن نفسها.
Israel was targeting civilians and civilian sites. There was no dispute, no doubt about what was happening.
وليس هناك ثمة شك في أن إسرائيل كانت تستهدف المدنيين. وكل يوم كان يعلن ذلك فيه المتحدث باسم البيت الأبيض الأمريكي بأن إسرائيل كان لها حق الدفاع وما زال لها حق الدفاع عن نفسها. كان يعطي إسرائيل مددا نفسيا أو مساندة بضرب المدنيين في غزة. وكيف انتهت؟ أن إسرائيل قامت بالإطلاق على 5 ملاجئ تابعة للأمم المتحدة. وأصبح الغليان والفوران للمجتمع الدولي فيما
He finally said that Israel is committing a criminal act. Ban Ki-moon. Can you imagine? Ban Ki-moon, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's the Secretary General of the United States. So he's just the Secretary of the United States, not of the United Nations. I said of the United States. Very hard to tell. In any case, what happened?
قال أنها في نهاية المطاف أنها جريمة في حق الإنسانية بعد تدمير 5 ملاجئ تابعة للأمم المتحدة.
He was completely alone. So finally, the State Department started issuing statements calling what happened disgraceful, awful, terrible. That was August 3rd. The U.S. finally, on August 3rd, denounced what happened.
قالت شيئا يمكن أن أمام ما يمكن أن نسميه غير العادل في هجوم الإسرائيليين على المدارس. شكرا لكم.
Of course, we are running a little bit behind time, but I've had so many questions submitted, so we're going to try to get to as many of these as we can in the next 5 minutes. This question is for Norman. Norman, the question is, I heard on NPR that Netanyahu cannot have Hamas go in case someone worse like ISIS comes.
السؤال يتحدث عن NPR أن هناك داعش ستكون عن حماس إذا ذهبت حماس. وهو الآن يمدح المقاومة الشرسة من قبل المقاومة الفلسطينية في قطاع غزة. ويبدو أن إسرائيل لا تلقي بالا لمحاولة
Norman, another question here for you, based on your statements about the BDS. Explain why you feel that the right of is incompatible. Okay, speaking of, well, on the topic of boycotts, I'll direct this one at Mohammed. When we look at Egypt,
سؤال عن
Still on the agenda. We're having conferences, learning, spreading the word, being active, refusing to grant Sisi the legitimacy that he. I think as long as that's happening, we have hope. It's an uphill battle. I'm not as optimistic as some of my friends and colleagues. I think this is going to be a very prolonged battle with that coup regime. But we need to be working on many fronts. I'm an academic, and so I have committed to dedicating a lot of my research and my talks in the coming weeks and months and years to Egypt and the Egyptian situation. That's what I do. But everyone has something that they can.
This is a question about Israel and Egypt, and the question is: did Israel give $50 to $80 million to Sisi's regime to propel it and to anybody? If you or Norman would better answer.
I don't know.
Theories because they just confuse. There are many forces regionally, internationally, and also internally in Egypt that wanted to see the democratic experiment in Egypt fail.
هناك العديد من القوى داخل مصر تريد أن ترى أن الحركة الديمقراطية
which didn't want the democratic experiment to succeed. We shouldn't underestimate the fact that a large array of individuals who were determined to see this
Just one or two more questions here, and I'll direct these. The question is, do the public broadcasters that are well known in Egypt, do they change their views political power shifts on the bandwagon of whoever is in charge?
Really good question. First of all, Egypt is a talk show culture. I think for those that don't know, that's an important point. It's not like here where, there are just a handful of news talk shows on in the evening. In Egypt, from 7 p.m. until about 1 a.m., there are about 18 networks and you're just running news, these kind of news talk shows back to back. So it's a talk show culture. You have 40% illiteracy. People just want to sit back and favorite news, Bill O'Reilly. Now, the question is an empirical question. It needs to be studied. I'm still exploring it, but I do know this because I did a before and after comparative study where I looked at news coverage during the Mubarak period and then news coverage during that 1 year Morsi period. And interestingly, we find significant differences between the ways in which these corporate-owned newscasters and newspapers were covering the two different leaders, Morsi and Mubarak. We also notice differences even in how the state-run newspapers were operating. So, for example, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it was around 76% of Al-Ahram's news reports about President Morsi were neutral in tone during Morsi's period. Compare that to Mubarak's period, where more than 80% of those news stories about Mubarak in the 1 year that I analyzed were positive in tone. That's just one example. So I think that a lot of these figures are very sympathetic to the Mubarak regime. Really easy explanation why. I'm going to get into it. You can probably. And they're also sympathetic to the Sisi regime, which is just an extension of Egypt's. It's the same basic regime. It's Egypt's deep state. So, but they were very antagonistic. Many of these folks were very antagonistic. I mean, hysterical in their coverage. I described some of that of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Last question here, and I don't know if this was.
I need like a half an hour with that. But look, Al Jazeera should be praised for the fact that they're continuing to cover Egypt and in particular cover the protesters. This is something that really bothers me as a media scholar. We're taught in journalism school to cover protests. They fulfill like 3 or 4 of the news values. Yet for the last 400 days, you've had people in Egypt literally risking their lives in the streets every day. There have been protests every single day. Right now, what time is it? There are protests literally right now all over Egypt. But you won't hear anything about it on CNN. You won't hear anything about it in the New York Times, or very rarely. Al Jazeera is the only network that's keeping that protest movement kind of alive in the media sphere. And protests need media coverage. So they should be praised. They've done some wonderful reporting, wonderful investigative reporting. Now, are they perfectly balanced? No. They've made a determination. First of all, they think, they say this is a military coup. They say that the Rabaa was a massacre. Now, it's not necessarily a problem, but they could do a better job, let me just put it that way, of offering up the other perspective. Even if I personally find the other perspective, whether it's a pro-Sisi perspective, even if I disagree with it. But I think they could do a better job of bringing on 2 or 3 guests who have diverging views and letting them debate it out. That's my short answer, but that really means a lot. I need to say a lot more.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate all the questions. There were so many submitted. We do need to take a Melissa and Mohammed and Norman and Gada. And we'll take a short 5-minute break here, just a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back with our third and last program. Thank you so much.
Just use the other one.
ثالثة
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to try to start the third panel in about 2 or 3 minutes, so if everybody can come back into the auditorium and take a seat, that would be great.